The autumn sun hung warm and golden over Meadowbrook, Pennsylvania, painting the quiet suburban street in shades of amber and rust. Fallen leaves swirled in gentle eddies across the Rodriguez family's front lawn, and the air carried that distinct October crispness that promised Halloween was just around the corner. In the backyard, 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez pushed herself higher on the swing set, her small legs pumping with determination as her dark curls bounced with each arc through the air. "Mommy, look, I'm flying," Emma's voice rang out pure and joyful. Maria Rodriguez looked up from the garden bed where she'd been planting mums and smiled at her daughter. "I see you, Mija, you're going so high." She brushed dirt from her hands, watching Emma's delighted face as the swing carried her up and down, up and down. The chain-link fence surrounding their yard had been installed just last year, 6 feet tall with a locked gate. Safe, secure, everything a parent could want. "Mommy, I'm thirsty," Emma called out, slowing her swing with her feet dragging through the grass. "Okay, baby, stay right there on the swing, I'll get you some juice. Don't move, okay?" Maria stood, brushing off her jeans. "Okay, Mommy." Maria walked toward the back door, glancing over her shoulder one last time. Emma was pumping her legs again, singing a song from her favorite cartoon. The image was so perfectly normal, so beautifully mundane, that it would later haunt Maria's dreams, the last moment of before. Inside the kitchen, Maria opened the refrigerator and grabbed 2 juice boxes, apple for Emma and one for herself. She glanced at the kitchen clock. 3:47 p.m. She'd need to start thinking about dinner soon. Maybe chicken nuggets, Emma's favorite. She grabbed a small bag of goldfish crackers from the pantry. The entire trip inside took perhaps 2 minutes, maybe 3 at most. When Maria pushed open the back door, her arms full of snacks, she was already calling out, "Emma, I got apple juice and—" The words died in her throat. The swing moved back and forth in the breeze, empty. Its chains creaked softly, a sound that would echo in Maria's nightmares for months to come. "Emma," Maria's voice was steady, but her heart had begun to race. "Emma, baby, where are you?" She scanned the yard. Maybe Emma had gone to her playhouse, that little pink plastic cottage in the corner. Maria walked quickly across the grass, her pace accelerating with each step. She pulled open the playhouse door. Empty. Just Emma's tea set and stuffed animals arranged for a party that would never happen. "Emma, this isn't funny. Come out right now." Maria's voice had climbed an octave. She checked behind the shed, under the deck, inside the garage. Her movements became frantic, less methodical. The juice boxes fell from her hands, forgotten. She ran to the fence, examining every section. All secure. The gate was still locked from the inside. "Emma," this time it was a scream. That scream brought neighbor Tom Patterson running from his yard next door. Then Lisa Chen from across the street. Within minutes, neighbors were shouting Emma's name, searching bushes, looking under porches, calling into drainage pipes. "I'm calling 911, Tom yelled, already dialing. Maria stood in the center of her backyard, turning in circles, her mind refusing to accept what was happening. Emma couldn't be gone. She was just here, right here on this swing. Maria's hands found her face, and she realized she was screaming, a sound she'd never heard herself make before, raw and primal. The first police cruiser arrived within 4 minutes, then another, and another. Within 20 minutes, Meadowbrook's entire on-duty police force had descended on Maple Street. Officers spread out in organized search patterns. A helicopter was requested. Volunteers arrived with flashlights as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. Officer Jake Mitchell arrived in his K-9 unit at 4:15 p.m. He'd been 20 minutes away, finishing paperwork from a drug bust when the call came through. Missing 3-year-old possible abduction. He'd broken every speed limit getting there. Mitchell was a 15-year veteran with the Meadowbrook Police Department, and Rex, his 4-year-old German Shepherd, had found 12 missing persons over their 3 years as partners. Hikers, dementia patients, runaway teens. But this was different. A toddler vanished from her own fenced yard. The clock was already ticking, and everyone knew that the first few hours were critical. Rex bounded from the vehicle, his powerful body alert and ready. Mitchell grabbed Emma's stuffed bunny from Maria, she'd been clutching it like a lifeline, and let Rex smell it thoroughly. The dog's nostrils flared, processing thousands of scent molecules humans couldn't even perceive. "Find Rex, find." Rex put his nose to the ground near the swing set, circling, processing. Then his head snapped up. He moved to the fence line, sniffing intensely at one section. He barked once, sharp, insistent, then sat, staring at a point on the fence. Mitchell examined the area with his flashlight. There, marks in the wood, fresh scrapes. Someone had climbed over recently, likely with something heavy. The fence was 6 feet, but for a determined adult, not impossible. "He went over here," Mitchell radioed. "Rex has the scent." The dog was already moving, pulling Mitchell toward the gate. Once outside the yard, Rex's pace increased. He led them down Maple Street, then turned abruptly toward the industrial area at the edge of town, a place of abandoned warehouses and forgotten storage facilities that the town had been promising to redevelop for years. As darkness fell completely and temperatures dropped into the low 40s, Maria Rodriguez sat in a police car wrapped in a blanket, watching flashlight beams dance across distant buildings. Her phone rang constantly. Her husband Carlos was racing home from a business trip, still 2 hours away. Family members were calling. Friends were organizing search parties. But Maria could only stare into the darkness where her daughter had disappeared, whispering prayers and promises to a God she hoped was listening. 8 hours into the search, most volunteers had gone home, defeated by darkness and cold. Police continued, but the mood had shifted from rescue to recovery. Nobody said it aloud, but everyone thought it. Children don't usually survive long in October nights. Then at 11:52 p.m. a sound pierced the night, Rex's triumphant barking, urgent and insistent. Mitchell's radio crackled to life. "We've got something." Old industrial shed, 400 yards past the Miller warehouse. Rex won't stop barking. Police vehicles converged on the location. Mitchell kicked open the shed's rotting door, Rex surging inside ahead of him. And there, in the beam of Mitchell's flashlight, curled in the corner amid old paint cans and rusty tools, was Emma Rodriguez. She was shivering violently, her lips tinged blue from the cold, but she was breathing. She was alive. Rex approached her gently, whining softly, and Emma's eyes, wide and terrified and empty of the joy they'd held just hours before, found the dog. Her small hand reached out, touching Rex's fur. Mitchell scooped Emma into his arms, wrapping her in his jacket as he radioed. "We've got her. She's alive. Get medical here now." As paramedics examined Emma, as Maria arrived and collapsed sobbing over her daughter's small body, as police began processing the shed as a crime scene, one thing became horrifyingly clear. Emma wouldn't speak. Not a word. Not a sound. Her eyes stared at nothing and everything, and whatever she'd experienced in those 8 hours had stolen her voice completely. Rex sat near the ambulance, his job complete, watching as the little girl he'd found was loaded inside. Mitchell knelt beside his partner, scratching behind his ears. "Good boy, Rex, good boy." If only Emma could say the same. But her silence was absolute, and in that silence, a criminal case was already dying before it could begin. The pediatric wing of Meadowbrook General Hospital had never felt so heavy with despair. In room 304, Emma Rodriguez sat propped against pillows, clutching the stuffed bunny that had helped Rex find her scent. Her physical examination had revealed no serious injuries, some bruising on her arms, mild hypothermia, dehydration. But it was the psychological damage that terrified everyone who looked into her vacant eyes. Dr. Patricia Alvarez, the hospital's chief pediatrician, had been treating children for 23 years. She'd seen abuse cases, trauma victims, children who'd witnessed unspeakable things. But Emma's complete withdrawal was unlike anything in her experience. The little girl who, according to her mother, had been a chatterbox just yesterday, constantly singing, asking questions, narrating her every activity, now sat in absolute silence. "Emma, sweetie, can you tell me if anything hurts?" Dr. Alvarez asked gently, kneeling beside the hospital bed. Emma's eyes flickered toward the doctor, then away. Nothing, not even a nod or shake of her head. Maria sat on the opposite side of the bed, her hand resting on Emma's small leg. She hadn't slept in over 30 hours. Her eyes were swollen nearly shut from crying, and her voice had gone hoarse from screaming her daughter's name across Meadowbrook the previous night. "Please, baby," Maria whispered. "Just say something, anything. Mommy's here, you're safe now." Emma turned her head toward the window, away from both of them. Carlos Rodriguez arrived from the airport at dawn, still wearing his business suit from the conference in Chicago. He'd spent 6 hours on a plane, unable to do anything but imagine the worst. When he burst into the hospital room and saw Emma alive, he'd broken down completely. But his relief turned to anguish when he realized his daughter wouldn't acknowledge him, wouldn't speak, wouldn't even cry. Down the hall in a private consultation room, Detective Sarah Brennan was coordinating the biggest investigation Meadowbrook had ever seen. At 42, Brennan had worked her way up from patrol officer to lead detective, specializing in crimes against children. She had a reputation for being relentless, and this case had already consumed her completely. "Talk to me about the shed," she said to Officer Mitchell, who sat across from her with Rex lying at his feet. The German shepherd's chin rested on his paws, but his eyes remained alert, watching the door as if he knew they were discussing Emma. "It's been abandoned for at least 5 years, Mitchell reported, consulting his notes. "Belongs to an old paint company that went bankrupt. We found a sleeping bag in the corner, relatively new, purchased within the last year based on the tag. Food wrappers, empty water bottles. Someone had been using that space, Sarah. This wasn't random." Brennan's jaw tightened. Premeditated. Someone scouted that location, prepared it. They knew exactly where they were taking her. "There's more," Mitchell continued, his voice dropping. "We found a length of chain bolted to the wall, long enough to reach the sleeping bag but not the door, and there were scratches on the floor, fresh ones, like someone had been trying to drag themselves toward the exit." The image made Brennan's stomach turn. Emma, that tiny 3-year-old, alone in the dark, chained like an animal. 8 hours that must have felt like an eternity to a terrified child. "We're processing everything for DNA, prints, trace evidence," Brennan said. "But we need Emma to tell us who did this. Without her testimony, we're working blind." "She's not talking, Sarah. Not at all. The doctors say it could be weeks, months, maybe never. Selective mutism triggered by extreme trauma." Brennan stood and began packing. "Then we work the case the old-fashioned way, door to door. Security cameras, known offenders in the area." She paused. "Pull up the registry. Everyone within a 5-mile radius of the Rodriguez house." By noon, the list had been narrowed to 7 registered sex offenders living in proximity to Maple Street. 6 of them had alibis that checked out. They'd been at work, with family, or their ankle monitors placed them elsewhere. But the 7th name made everyone in the investigation room go still. David Thornton, age 38, registered offender, conviction from 8 years ago for attempted kidnapping of a minor in a neighboring county. He'd served 5 years, been released on parole, and had moved to Meadowbrook just 18 months ago. His address, 412 Oak Street, 3 blocks from the Rodriguez family. "Bring him in," Brennan ordered. David Thornton arrived at the police station with his attorney Marcus Webb, a sharp-dressed defense lawyer with a reputation for getting guilty clients acquitted on technicalities. Thornton was unremarkable in appearance. Average height, thinning brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of man who could disappear in a crowd, which made him all the more dangerous. "My client is here voluntarily to cooperate with your investigation," Webb announced before Brennan could even begin. He had nothing to do with this tragic incident, and he resensed the implication. "Where were you yesterday between 3:30 and 4:00 p.m.?" Brennan asked Thornton directly. Thornton's voice was calm, almost bored. "I was home, working on my computer. I'm a freelance web designer. I rarely leave the house during the day." "Anyone verify that?" "I live alone, detective, but my computer activity logs will show I was online, working on a client's website." "Computer logs can be faked," Brennan countered. Webb interjected smoothly. "Do you have any evidence linking my client to this crime? Any witnesses? Any physical proof?" Brennan's silence was answer enough. Over the next 3 days, the investigation team worked around the clock. They pulled security footage from every business and doorbell camera within a 2-mile radius of Maple Street. And there, on the Morton family's camera at 3:52 p.m., was a dark blue Honda Civic driving slowly past the Rodriguez house. The license plate was partially obscured, but the vehicle match was close to Thornton's car. Search warrants were executed on Thornton's home and vehicle. In the trunk of his Honda, forensic technicians found carpet fibers that were microscopically consistent with the fibers on Emma's clothing. His cell phone records showed his device had pinged off a tower near the industrial district at 4:47 p.m., roughly the time frame Emma would have been taken there. But it was all circumstantial, close, but not definitive. The fibers could have transferred innocently. The cell tower covered a large area. The security footage didn't clearly show the driver's face or a complete license plate. "It's him," Brennan told District Attorney Raymond Porter in his office. "Every instinct I have says David Thornton took that little girl." Porter, a career prosecutor who'd won 83% of his cases over 20 years, leaned back in his chair and studied the evidence board. "Instinct doesn't convict, Sarah. Juries need proof beyond reasonable doubt. What we have here is a circumstantial case held together by thread and prayer. So we don't charge him." "I didn't say that." Porter stood, moving closer to the board, examining photos of Emma of the shed of Thornton. "We charge him. We go to trial. But I need you to understand something. Without Emma's testimony, without her identifying Thornton as her abductor, Marcus Webb is going to shred our case. He'll create reasonable doubt about every piece of evidence. And Thornton walks." "Emma won't talk," Brennan said quietly. "The trauma psychologist says she may never speak about what happened. We've tried everything: play therapy, art therapy, gentle questioning. She just shuts down." Porter was quiet for a long moment. Then he made his decision. "We proceed anyway. We arrest Thornton, we build the strongest circumstantial case possible, and we pray for a miracle. Because if we don't try and this man hurts another child, that blood is on our hands." The arrest happened at dawn. David Thornton was pulled from his bed, read his rights, and processed into the system. He maintained his innocence throughout, his expression never changing, his voice never rising above a monotone. In her hospital room, Emma still hadn't spoken. She'd been discharged medically but remained under psychiatric observation. Maria had started bringing family photo albums, showing Emma pictures of happier times, trying desperately to remind her daughter of who she'd been before the nightmare. Emma would look at the photos with those empty eyes, and then turn away. The trial date was set for 6 months later, 6 months to build a case, 6 months to hope Emma might find her voice again. 6 months that would determine whether a predator went to prison or walked free to hunt again. 6 months had crawled by with agonizing slowness. Winter had given way to spring, and the dogwoods outside Meadowbrook County Courthouse were in full bloom, their white petals drifting across the manicured lawn like snow. Inside Courtroom 3B, however, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. The air crackled with tension, anticipation, and the weight of justice waiting to be served, or denied. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Every wooden bench was filled with community members, journalists from 3 states, and victims' rights advocates who'd driven hours to witness the trial. The bailiff had turned away at least 50 people, leaving them to wait in the hallway, hopping for a seat if someone left. The case had captured regional attention. The silent witness trial, the media had dubbed it, and the name had stuck. Judge Martin Henderson, a stern 62-year-old with 30 years on the bench, surveyed his courtroom with sharp gray eyes. He'd seen thousands of cases, but few had generated this level of public interest or emotion. He banged his gavel 3 times, the sharp cracks echoing off the high ceilings. "Order, this court will come to order." At the prosecution table, District Attorney Raymond Porter sat with Detective Sarah Brennan and 2 assistant prosecutors. Porter's usually immaculate appearance showed subtle signs of stress. His tie was slightly crooked, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He'd spent 6 months building this case, knowing every piece of evidence would be scrutinized, challenged, and potentially dismissed. Across the aisle at the defense table, David Thornton sat in a gray suit that made him look like any other businessman. His attorney, Marcus Webb, exuded confidence in an expensive navy suit, his silver cufflinks catching the light as he organized his materials. Webb was known for his theatrical courtroom style and his ability to plant seeds of doubt in jurors' minds. He'd won cases that everyone thought were unwinnable. Thornton's expression was neutral, almost bored, as if he were attending a routine meeting rather than facing 35 years in prison. Occasionally, he would glance toward the gallery where his elderly mother sat, her face etched with denial and grief. The jury, 7 women and 5 men, ranging from a 23-year-old college student to a 67-year-old retired teacher, had been seated after 3 days of voir dire. Each had sworn they could be impartial, but everyone in the courtroom knew this case would test that promise. Porter stood for his opening statement, buttoning his suit jacket. He walked slowly toward the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. "Ladies and gentlemen, on October 15th of last year, a 3-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez was playing on a swing in her own backyard. Her mother had gone inside for 2 minutes, just 2 minutes to get juice boxes. When she returned, Emma was gone." Porter's voice was measured, but emotion simmered beneath the surface. For 8 hours, that little girl was held captive in a cold, dark shed. She was chained to a wall. She was terrified. And when police finally found her, something had been stolen from her, something even more precious than those 8 hours: her voice. Several jurors leaned forward. Porter had them hooked. "The evidence will show that the defendant, David Thornton, a registered sex offender living 3 blocks from Emma's home, planned and executed her abduction. Security footage places his vehicle near the Rodriguez residence at the time Emma disappeared. Forensic evidence, carpet fibers matching those found on Emma's clothing, was discovered in the trunk of his car. Cell phone records put him near the shed where Emma was imprisoned. And most damningly, the defendant has no alibi except his own word." Porter paused, letting the information sink in. Emma Rodriguez cannot tell you in words what happened to her that day. Trauma has stolen her voice, but the evidence speaks for her. And the evidence, ladies and gentlemen, points to one man. That man. Porter turned, pointing directly at Thornton. "The evidence will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that David Thornton is guilty." Marcus Webb rose for the defense's opening statement, his movements deliberately casual, as if the prosecution's case was hardly worth addressing. "Reasonable doubt," Webb began, emphasizing each word. "That's the standard here. And let me tell you what the prosecution actually has: a fiber. One fiber that could have come from anywhere, transferred at a grocery store, a gas station, anywhere my client's car was parked near the Rodriguez family. They have cell phone data showing my client's phone pinged a tower that covers 7 square miles. 7 square miles that include his home, his regular route to the post office, and yes, the industrial area. But it also includes 3 shopping centers, 2 schools, and approximately 1,500 other residences." Webb walked along the jury box, his voice conversational, friendly. They have grainy security footage of a dark sedan, and there are approximately 47,000 dark Honda Civics registered in this county alone. The license plate, obscured. The driver, invisible. This could be anyone's car. He paused for effect. What the prosecution doesn't have is eyewitness testimony. They don't have DNA evidence. They don't have fingerprints at the scene linking my client to that shed. They have a theory, a compelling theory, I'll grant them that, but theories don't convict. Evidence does. And the evidence here, it's circumstantial at best, coincidental at worst. Webb returned to his table. My client is a man trying to rebuild his life after a mistake he made nearly a decade ago. He's paid his debt to society. He's followed every requirement of his parole. And now, because a terrible crime occurred in his neighborhood, he's being railroaded. I ask that you listen carefully to the evidence, the actual evidence, not the emotion, not the story. And when you do, you'll see that the prosecution hasn't proven anything beyond a reasonable doubt. The first witness was Maria Rodriguez. She took the stand wearing a simple black dress, her hands trembling as she placed them on the Bible to be sworn in. In the gallery, Emma sat with Carlos and Maria's mother, dressed in a pink dress with a white collar. The little girl clutched a coloring book and crayons, her grandmother's arm around her shoulders protectively. Porter approached Maria gently. "Mrs. Rodriguez, can you tell us about October 15th? Maria's voice broke immediately. It was a beautiful day. Emma was playing outside. She loved that swing set. We just installed it for her 3rd birthday the month before. Tears streamed down her face. I only went inside for a minute, maybe 2. I was getting her juice because she asked for it. When I came back out." "Take your time," Porter said softly. "When I came back out, the swing was empty. I called her name. I thought maybe she was hiding, playing a game. But then I checked everywhere, the playhouse, behind the shed, under the deck, and I just knew something was wrong. The gate was still locked, but Emma was gone." "Can you describe Emma before this incident?" Maria smiled through her tears. She never stopped talking. From the moment she woke up until bedtime, she was singing, asking questions, telling stories. She had this imagination. She'd have tea parties with her stuffed animals and narrate everything they said. She was so happy, so full of life. "And after she was found?" Maria's smile disappeared. "She hasn't spoken a word, not one word in 6 months. She doesn't sing. She barely makes eye contact. It's like someone reached inside my daughter and turned off all the light." Webb cross-examined, his tone respectful but probing. "Mrs. Rodriguez, in the confusion of discovering Emma missing, is it possible someone could have entered your yard without you noticing?" "The gate was locked from the inside," Maria insisted. "But someone could have climbed the fence." I suppose, but—" No further questions. The forensic experts came next. Dr. Richard Chen, the lead forensic analyst, testified about the carpet fibers found in Thornton's trunk. "The fibers are microscopically consistent with those found on Emma Rodriguez's clothing," Dr. Chen explained, showing magnified images on the courtroom screens. "Same synthetic composition, same dye lot, same manufacturing characteristics." Porter nodded. "In your expert opinion, what does this indicate?" "It indicates contact between Emma's clothing and the interior of that vehicle." On cross-examination, Webb pounced. "Dr. Chen, you said consistent with, not a definitive match, correct? Fiber evidence cannot be individualized like DNA or fingerprints. So these fibers could have come from any carpet using this particular material." "Technically, yes, but—" "Thank you, doctor. No further questions." The cell phone expert testified about tower pings. The security footage expert testified about the dark sedan. Each piece of evidence, presented by the prosecution as damning, was carefully dismantled by Webb as merely coincidental. By the end of day 3, the jury's faces showed confusion, uncertainty. The prosecution's case was strong and aggregate, but each individual piece could be explained away. That evening, Porter sat in his office, head in his hands. Brennan paced behind him. "He's good," she admitted, meaning Webb. "He's really good." "We need Emma," Porter said flatly. "Without her testimony, without her identifying Thornton, we're losing. I can see it in the jury's faces." "She still won't talk. I visited her yesterday with the child psychologist. Same result." Porter looked up, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. Then God help us all. Prosecution was entering its fourth day, and the atmosphere in Raymond Porter's office felt like a funeral. Evidence boxes were stacked against every wall, photographs of Emma before and after the abduction were pinned to a corkboard, and empty coffee cups littered the conference table. Porter, Brennan, and two assistant prosecutors sat in defeated silence, watching the clock tick toward another day of watching their case slowly unravel. A knock on the door broke the tension. "Come in," Porter called, not bothering to hide his exhaustion. Dr. Sarah Chen entered, but this wasn't the forensic analyst who'd testified about carpet fibers. This was Dr. Sarah Chen, the child psychologist who'd been working with Emma since her rescue. She was a petite woman in her early 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an air of calm competence that came from 30 years of working with traumatized children. "Mr. Porter, Detective Brennan, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to speak with you about Emma Rodriguez. It's important." Porter gestured to an empty chair. "Please, doctor, at this point I'll take any insight you can offer." Dr. Chen sat, placing a folder on the table. "I've been conducting therapy sessions with Emma 3 times a week since November. As you know, she hasn't spoken about the abduction, hasn't spoken at all, actually, despite our best efforts with play therapy, art therapy, and various other approaches." "We know, doctor," Brennan said gently. "We've been hopping for a breakthrough, but—" "That's why I'm here," Dr. Chen interrupted, a hint of excitement breaking through her professional demeanor. "I think I may have found something, or rather, Emma showed me something." She opened the folder and spread out a series of drawings across the table. They were clearly done by a child's hand, crayon on white paper, simple but telling. Every single drawing featured the same subject: a large dog with pointed ears, drawn in various shades of brown and black, always with a star or badge on its collar. "Emma draws this constantly," Dr. Chen explained. "In every session without prompting. Sometimes the dog is standing, sometimes sitting, sometimes running. But it's always the same dog and it's always wearing this star." Porter leaned forward, studying the drawings. "Rex, the K9 who found her." "Exactly. Last week I tried something. I showed Emma photographs of different dogs, golden retrievers, poodles, beagles, and German shepherds. When I showed her the German shepherds, particularly police K9s, her entire demeanor changed. She smiled, Mr. Porter. For the first time in 6 months, that child smiled." Brennan's eyes widened. "What are you suggesting, doctor?" Dr. Chen took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting that Rex represents safety to Emma. In her traumatic experience, everything was terrifying: being taken, being chained in that dark shed, being alone. But then Rex found her. He was the turning point between her nightmare and her rescue. Psychologically, he's become her anchor to safety, her symbol of protection." "So you think if Rex were present, Emma might be able to testify?" Porter's voice carried cautious hope. "I think it's possible. I can't promise anything, but in my professional opinion, Rex's presence could provide Emma with enough of a sense of security to help her communicate. Even if she can't speak full sentences, she might be able to nod, shake her head, or point. That's more than we've gotten from her in months." Porter stood and began packing, his legal mind already running through the complications. "You want to bring a police dog into my courtroom during a criminal trial. Do you understand how unprecedented that is?" "I understand it's unusual." "Unusual?" Porter laughed, but there was no humor in it. Marcus Webb will lose his mind. He'll claim it's prejudicial, that seeing a police dog will bias the jury toward law enforcement. He'll argue it's theatrical, manipulative, a circus act designed to generate sympathy. "With respect, Mr. Porter," Dr. Chen said firmly, "Emma Rodriguez is 3 years old. She's the victim of a violent crime, and she's suffering from severe trauma-induced selective mutism. The court makes accommodations for adult witnesses with disabilities. Why shouldn't we make accommodations for a traumatized child?" Brennan interjected, "There's precedent for support animals in courtrooms. Therapy dogs have been used with child witnesses in several states." "In witness preparation rooms, yes," Porter countered. "In victim advocacy centers, but in the actual courtroom during testimony, that's a different legal battlefield entirely." Dr. Chen pulled out another document. "I've done my research. In 2011, a courthouse in New York allowed a golden retriever to accompany a child witness during testimony. In 2013, Washington state passed legislation explicitly allowing facility dogs in court. The practice is spreading, and more importantly, it works. Children with support animals present are more likely to provide complete and accurate testimony." Porter stopped packing and looked at the psychologist with new respect. "You've really thought this through." "Emma deserves a chance to tell her story, Mr. Porter. Right now, she's trapped in silence, and the man who hurt her might go free because of it. If Rex can give her the courage to speak, or even to communicate non-verbally, don't we owe it to her to try?" The room fell silent as Porter weighed the decision. It was risky, incredibly risky. Webb would fight it tooth and nail. Judge Henderson might reject the request outright, and even if approved, there was no guarantee Emma would actually be able to testify. But what was the alternative? Watch their case crumble, let Thornton walk free. "All right," Porter finally said. "We petition the judge, but we do this right. I want case law, precedents, expert testimony about the therapeutic value. We need to show that this isn't a gimmick. It's a legitimate accommodation for a child witness with special needs." Over the next 18 hours, Porter's team worked furiously. They compiled cases from 7 different states where support animals had been permitted in courtrooms. They prepared affidavits from Dr. Chen and 2 other child psychologists. They drafted a motion that framed Rex's presence not as a prosecution tactic, but as a disability accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The motion was filed at 8:47 a.m. on day 4 of the trial. Marcus Webb's response arrived by 10:15 a.m., and it was exactly as explosive as Porter had predicted. "This is outrageous," Webb's voice echoed through Judge Henderson's chambers during the emergency hearing. "The prosecution wants to parade a police dog through the courtroom to generate sympathy. It's blatantly prejudicial. The jury will see that dog and immediately assume my client is guilty." "Your Honor," Porter responded calmly, "this isn't about generating sympathy. This is about allowing a traumatized child witness to testify. Dr. Chen's evaluation clearly shows that Emma Rodriguez suffers from trauma-induced selective mutism. Rex isn't a prop, he's a therapeutic tool." "A therapeutic tool wearing a police badge," Webb shot back. "Let's be honest about what this is. The prosecution knows their case is weak, so they're resorting to emotional manipulation." Judge Henderson held up his hand. "Gentlemen, enough. I've reviewed the case law and I've read Dr. Chen's evaluation." He paused, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "This is unprecedented in my courtroom, but then again, this entire case is unprecedented." The judge looked at Webb. "Mr. Webb, I understand your concerns about prejudice, but I also have a responsibility to ensure that all witnesses, particularly child witnesses, can testify effectively. Dr. Chen has presented compelling evidence that this child cannot testify without support." "Then use a teddy bear," Webb argued. "Use a blanket, use anything except a dog wearing police insignia." The research shows that the therapeutic benefit comes from the specific animal the child has bonded with, Porter interjected. We can't substitute a random therapy dog. It has to be Rex. Judge Henderson was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming on his desk. Finally, he spoke. Here's my ruling. I'm going to allow Rex to be present during Emma Rodriguez's testimony, but with strict conditions. Officer Mitchell will remain with the dog at all times, positioned near the witness stand but not directly in the jury's line of sight. Rex will wear a service vest without visible police insignia. The jury will be instructed that Rex is present solely as a support animal for the child witness, and that his presence should not influence their deliberations in any way. Webb started to object, but Henderson cut him off. My ruling stands, Mr. Webb. This courtroom will maintain absolute decorum, and if I sense any attempt by either side to exploit the dog's presence for theatrical effect, I will remove him immediately and hold the offending party in contempt. Are we clear? Both attorneys nodded. Good. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning. The Rodriguez family should be notified that Emma will be asked to testify, and someone get Officer Mitchell and Rex here for a briefing. As they left chambers, Brennan caught Porter in the hallway. Do you really think this will work? Porter looked through the courthouse windows toward the blooming dogwoods. I don't know, Sarah, but it's the only chance we have left. The morning of Emma's testimony arrived with an unseasonable chill. Despite it being late April, frost still clung to the courthouse windows, and the sky hung gray and heavy, as if the weather itself sensed the gravity of what was about to unfold. Inside Courtroom 3B, every seat was filled 30 minutes before proceedings were scheduled to begin. The tension was palpable. Reporters clutched their notepads, spectators whispered nervously, and even the bailiff seemed more alert than usual. Officer Jake Mitchell stood in a private witness waiting room adjacent to the courtroom, his hand resting on Rex's head. The German shepherd sat at perfect attention, his brown eyes intelligent and calm. Mitchell had given Rex extra training over the past week, preparing him for the unusual environment he was about to enter. No barking, no sudden movements, just steady, quiet presence. You ready, boy? Mitchell whispered, scratching behind Rex's ears. That little girl needs you today, just like she needed you that night. Rex's tail swished once across the floor, as if he understood. In another waiting room down the hall, Maria Rodriguez knelt in front of her daughter, trying to smooth down Emma's dark curls. Emma wore a light blue dress with white flowers. Maria had let her pick it out herself, one of the few decisions Emma had shown any interest in making over the past 6 months. The little girl's face was pale, her dark eyes enormous in her small face. Baby, we're going to go into a big room with lots of people, Maria explained for the 5th time, her voice shaking despite her efforts to sound calm. You don't have to be scared. Mommy and Daddy will be right there, and remember who else will be there. Emma's expression didn't change. Rex will be there, Maria continued, pulling out one of Emma's crayon drawings of the German shepherd. The good dog who found you. He's going to be right there with you, okay? For just a moment, so brief Maria almost missed it, something flickered in Emma's eyes. Recognition, hope, but then it was gone and Emma's face returned to its usual blank stare. Carlos stood by the window, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He'd taken a leave of absence from his job, spending every day in the courtroom, watching the man he believed had hurt his daughter sit there with that infuriatingly calm expression. Carlos had never been a violent man, but he'd had fantasies, dark, vengeful fantasies about what he'd like to do to David Thornton. Dr. Sarah Chen entered the waiting room, her presence bringing a sense of professional calm. It's almost time. How is everyone doing? Terrified, Maria admitted. That's perfectly normal. Emma, sweetheart, Dr. Chen knelt beside the child. Remember what we talked about. You don't have to say anything you don't want to say. If you get scared, you can just look at Rex. He'll be right there. Would you like to see him before we go in? Emma's head turned slightly. the most reaction she'd shown all morning. "I'll take that as a yes," Dr. Chen said gently. They walked down the hallway to where Mitchell waited with Rex. The moment Emma saw the German shepherd, her entire body language shifted. Her rigid posture softened slightly, and she took 2 small steps forward before stopping, suddenly shy. Rex, with the intuition of a well-trained service animal, approached slowly, his movements deliberately gentle. He stopped just in front of Emma and sat, waiting. Emma's small hand reached out, trembling, and touched Rex's fur. The dog remained perfectly still, letting her pet him. "He remembers you," Mitchell said softly. "He's been waiting to see you again." Emma's fingers moved through Rex's thick coat, and for 30 seconds, the hallway was silent except for the soft sound of a child's breathing beginning to slow, beginning to calm. Then the bailiff appeared. "They're ready for you." The walk to the courtroom felt endless. Maria carried Emma, feeling her daughter's small body tense with each step. Carlos walked beside them, his hand on Emma's back. Dr. Chen led the way, and Mitchell followed with Rex. Judge Henderson had cleared the courtroom of all non-essential personnel, but it was still full, too full for a 3-year-old who'd barely left her house in 6 months. The judge had also instructed the gallery to remain absolutely silent, warning that anyone who made a sound would be immediately removed. The heavy oak doors opened. The silence that fell over courtroom 3B was absolute and profound. Every eye turned toward the small figure in Maria's arms. Jurors leaned forward in their seats. David Thornton's expression remained neutral, but his attorney's hand moved to his shoulder, a warning to show no reaction. Maria's footsteps echoed on the marble floor as she carried Emma toward the front of the courtroom. A special chair had been placed near the witness stand, low enough for a child, positioned so Emma could see Rex without having to turn her head too far. Mitchell guided Rex to a spot about 6 feet away, close enough for comfort but not so close as to be distracting. Judge Henderson's voice was gentler than anyone had ever heard it. "Good morning, Emma. My name is Judge Henderson. You don't have to be afraid. Nobody here is going to hurt you." Emma burrowed her face deeper into Maria's shoulder, her small hands clutching her mother's jacket. Maria sat in the special chair, keeping Emma in her lap. Porter had argued successfully that Emma should be allowed to testify while being held by her mother, another accommodation that Webb had fought bitterly but lost. Porter approached slowly, his movements careful and measured. He'd prepared for this moment for weeks, consulting with Dr. Chen about every word he would say, every gesture he would make. "Hi, Emma," Porter said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Mr. Porter. I'm one of the good guys, okay? I help people, and I want to help you today." No response. Emma's face remained hidden. "Emma, sweetheart, can you look at me?" Nothing. Minutes passed. The clock on the courtroom wall ticked steadily, each second feeling like an hour. Porter asked simple questions. "Can you tell me your name? How old are you? Do you like your dress?" But received no answers, not even a nod or shake of the head. Webb shifted in his seat, preparing to object to the entire proceeding as futile. Several jurors exchanged glances, their expressions showing sympathy but also doubt. Without testimony, without any communication from Emma, how could they convict? Porter glanced at Dr. Chen, who stood near the gallery. She nodded slightly. "Keep trying." "Emma," Porter said, "do you see the dog over there? That's Rex. Do you remember Rex?" Still nothing. Mitchell, sensing the moment, gave Rex a subtle hand signal. The German shepherd shifted position slightly, moving a bit closer, making himself more visible to Emma. And then slowly, Emma's head began to turn. Her face emerged from Maria's shoulder, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar courtroom with clear fear. They passed over the judge, over the jury, over the gallery full of strangers. She saw her father sitting in the front row, tears already streaming down his face. She saw Dr. Chen giving her an encouraging smile. And then Emma's eyes found Rex. The German shepherd sat at perfect attention, his ears forward, his eyes locked on the little girl he'd found in that dark shed 6 months ago. His tail moved just slightly, not a wag exactly, but a subtle acknowledgement. I remember you. I'm here. Emma's grip on Maria's jacket loosened. Her posture changed, straightening just a fraction. The entire courtroom held its collective breath, sensing that something profound was happening, that they were witnessing a pivotal moment. Porter remained frozen, afraid that any movement might break the spell. Judge Henderson leaned forward in his chair. The court reporter's hands hovered over her stenography machine, waiting. Emma continued to stare at Rex, and Rex stared back, two souls connected by a night of darkness and rescue, by trauma and salvation. And then, in the crushing silence of that courtroom, where justice hung in the balance and a child's voice had been stolen by fear, Emma Rodriguez lifted her small right hand. Her arm extended, trembling, her finger pointing directly at the German shepherd who had saved her life. Her lips parted, and she spoke. The words came out small and clear, cutting through the silence like a beam of light through darkness. Good dog. 2 words. Just 2 simple words from a 3-year-old girl. But in that moment they carried the weight of 6 months of silence, of 8 hours of terror, of a family's anguish and a community's hope. Maria's body shook with a sob she tried desperately to suppress. Her hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over her fingers. Carlos stood from his seat in the gallery, his legs nearly giving out beneath him, and a bailiff had to steady him with a gentle hand on his shoulder. But Emma wasn't finished. Her finger remained pointed at Rex, unwavering, and her voice grew slightly stronger with each word. Good dog found me. Rex's tail began to wag, slow, steady sweeps across the floor. His ears perked forward and a soft whine escaped his throat, a sound of recognition and something that might have been joy. Mitchell's hand went to his eyes, wiping away tears he couldn't stop. Judge Henderson sat motionless in his chair, his own eyes glistening. In 30 years on the bench, he'd heard thousands of testimonies, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever affected him like this. The jury box was a tableau of emotion. Juror number 3, a grandmother of 5, openly wept. Juror number 7, a retired Marine who'd maintained a stoic expression throughout the trial, cleared his throat roughly and looked away. Even the court reporter paused, her hands shaking over her machine. Porter stood frozen, barely breathing, terrified that any movement might break this miraculous moment. He'd prayed for this, planned for this, but now that it was happening, he found himself overwhelmed. He glanced at Dr. Chen, who nodded with professional satisfaction mixed with genuine awe. The therapy had worked. Rex's presence had unlocked something in Emma that months of traditional treatment couldn't reach. At the defense table, Marcus Webb's confident posture had collapsed. His pen had fallen from his hand, rolling across the table unnoticed. This was the nightmare scenario he'd feared from the moment Judge Henderson approved the dog's presence. David Thornton's face had gone pale, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Emma continued to stare at Rex, and something was happening to her expression. The blank, traumatized emptiness that had haunted her features for half a year was cracking, light seeping through. She slid down from Maria's lap, her small feet touching the floor, and took one tentative step toward Rex. Mitchell looked at Judge Henderson, silently asking permission. The judge nodded almost imperceptibly. "It's okay, boy," Mitchell whispered. "Go to her." Rex moved forward slowly, his training keeping his movements gentle and controlled despite his clear desire to reach the child. When he was close enough, Emma's hands sank into his thick fur, and she leaned her forehead against his neck. "Good dog," she whispered again, her voice muffled against Rex's coat. "You barked and barked. You found me in the dark place." The courtroom remained utterly silent except for the sound of crying from the gallery. Quiet, respectful tears from strangers who'd followed this case, who'd prayed for this family, who were now witnessing something sacred. Porter knelt down, positioning himself at Emma's eye level but maintaining distance, not wanting to break the connection between the child and the dog. His voice was barely audible, careful, gentle. "Emma, sweetheart, you're doing so good, so brave. Can you tell us about the dark place?" Emma's face remained pressed against Rex for a long moment. Then she turned slightly, her eyes finding Porter's. They were still shadowed with fear and pain, but there was something else there now, determination perhaps, or trust. "It was cold," Emma said, her voice so quiet that the court reporter had to lean forward to catch the words. "And scary. I cried for Mommy." "I know you did, sweetheart. You were so scared. Can you tell us who took you to the dark place?" Emma's small body tensed. Her hands gripped Rex's fur tighter, and the dog remained perfectly still, letting her hold on as tightly as she needed. "Emma, you're safe now," Porter continued. "Nobody can hurt you here. Rex is here. Your Mommy and Daddy are here. We're all here to keep you safe. Can you show us who the bad man was?" The courtroom waited. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Emma's eyes moved from Porter's face, scanning the courtroom. They passed over the jury, over the gallery, over the court reporter and the bailiffs. And then her eyes landed on the defense table. Her entire body went rigid. Her breathing quickened. For a moment, it seemed like she might retreat back into silence, back into the protective shell she'd built around herself. But Rex shifted slightly, pressing closer to her, and Emma's breathing began to slow. Her right hand released Rex's fur and rose, trembling violently, her small finger extending. The finger moved across the space between the witness area and the defense table, creating an invisible line of accusation that everyone in the courtroom could see as clearly as if it had been drawn in fire. "Bad man," Emma said, her voice cutting through the silence with devastating clarity. Her finger pointed directly, unmistakably, at David Thornton. "That's the bad man." Thornton's mask finally cracked. His eyes widened, and for just a moment everyone in that courtroom saw something flicker across his face: panic, guilt, rage. Then it was gone, replaced by a desperate attempt to appear innocent, confused, wrongly accused. But it was too late. The jury had seen it. Judge Henderson had seen it. Everyone had seen it. "He put me in his car," Emma continued, her words coming faster now as if a dam had broken. "He said we were going to see puppies, but there were no puppies. He took me to the dark place and put chains on me. I was so cold. I cried and cried, but nobody came." Maria had left her chair and was kneeling beside Emma now, one hand on her daughter's back, supporting her through this impossible testimony. "The floor was hard and dirty," Emma went on, her voice occasionally breaking. "There were spider webs. I could hear things moving in the dark. I was so scared. I thought Mommy and Daddy forgot about me." "We never forgot you, baby," Maria whispered. "Never, not for 1 second." Emma turned back to Rex, drawing strength from his presence. "And then I heard barking, loud barking. And then the door opened and there was light and the good dog was there. And the nice policeman picked me up and said I was safe." Porter had to pause to collect himself before continuing. "Emma, can you look at that man at the table again? Are you sure he's the one who took you?" Emma's eyes went to Thornton again, and this time there was no hesitation. "That's him. That's the bad man who took me away from Mommy." Webb finally found his voice, standing abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. This child has been coached. This entire proceeding is—" "Sit down, Mr. Webb," Judge Henderson said, his voice carrying steel. "Your objection is noted and overruled. The witness is testifying based on her own memory and recognition." Porter asked a few more gentle questions, letting Emma describe what she remembered: the smell of the shed, the feeling of the chain on her wrist, the sound of Rex's barking getting closer. Each answer was simple, childlike, but devastatingly credible. When Porter finally said, "No further questions, Your Honor," there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Webb stood for cross-examination, but his usual confidence was gone. He approached Emma carefully, his voice softer than anyone had heard it during the entire trial. "Emma, when you were in that dark place, could you see the man's face clearly?" Emma nodded. He had glasses, and he smelled funny, like the stuff Daddy uses to clean the car. Webb tried a few more questions, attempting to suggest Emma might be confused, might have been too scared to remember clearly. But Emma's answers remained consistent, and more damning, she kept pointing to Thornton every time Webb tried to create doubt. Finally, Webb gave up. No further questions. Judge Henderson looked at Emma with profound respect. "Emma, you've been very brave today. Thank you for telling us what happened. You can stay with your mommy and daddy now." Maria scooped Emma into her arms, holding her as if she might never let go. Carlos rushed forward, wrapping both of them in his embrace. Emma, still clutching Rex's collar, looked up at her parents. "Can the good dog come home with us?" she asked. A perfectly normal question from a 3-year-old, as if she hadn't just delivered the most powerful testimony of the entire trial. "Not today, sweetie," Carlos said through his tears. "But maybe Rex can come visit you soon. Would you like that?" Emma nodded against her father's shoulder, and as the Rodriguez family made their way out of the courtroom, Emma's small voice could be heard one more time. "Bye, good dog. Thank you for saving me." Rex watched them go, his tail wagging slowly, and Mitchell could swear the dog understood exactly what had just happened. Justice had finally found its voice. And that voice belonged to a 3-year-old girl and the German shepherd who'd rescued her from the dark. The courtroom felt different after Emma's testimony. The very air seemed charged with a new energy, a shift from uncertainty to conviction, from doubt to moral clarity. Judge Henderson had called a 30-minute recess to allow everyone to compose themselves, but when proceedings resumed, the emotional weight of what they'd witnessed still hung heavy over the room. Porter stood for his closing argument, but he didn't approach the jury with his usual commanding stride. Instead, he walked slowly, almost reverently, carrying the weight of Emma's words with him. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice steady but rich with emotion, "I've been a prosecutor for 23 years. I've tried hundreds of cases. I've presented DNA evidence, fingerprint analysis, video footage, expert testimony. I've built cases on mountains of physical evidence. But I have never presented testimony more powerful, more credible, or more devastating than what you heard from Emma Rodriguez today." He paused, letting his words settle over the jury box. Several jurors nodded almost imperceptibly. "Defense counsel will tell you that Emma is just a child, that children can be confused, that memory is unreliable. But what you saw today wasn't confusion. That little girl looked across this courtroom and identified, without hesitation, without coaching, the man who stole her from her backyard, who held her captive in a cold, dark shed, who chained her to a wall while she cried for her mother." Porter moved to the evidence table, picking up a photograph of the shed where Emma had been found. Emma described this place, the hard floor, the spider webs, the darkness. She described the smell of automotive cleaner, which forensic analysis confirmed was present in the shed. She described the chains, which we found bolted to the wall. Every detail she gave us matches the physical evidence. He set down the photograph and picked up another, this one of the carpet fibers under microscopic analysis. She described being put in a car. We found fibers from her clothing in David Thornton's trunk. She described a man with glasses who smelled of chemicals. David Thornton wears glasses and works with chemical cleaners in his garage. Porter returned to face the jury directly. "But more than that, more than all the physical evidence, you saw her reaction when she looked at the defendant. You saw the fear in her eyes. You saw her body tense. Children don't fake that kind of trauma response." Emma Rodriguez looked at David Thornton and recognized the man who terrorized her, and her words, "That's the bad man," came from a place of absolute truth. He walked along the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. Defense counsel argued that this was all circumstantial, all coincidence. But coincidence doesn't explain why Emma pointed at that specific man. Coincidence doesn't explain why she could describe details of her captivity that only the perpetrator and the police knew. And coincidence certainly doesn't explain why David Thornton, a registered sex offender with a prior conviction for attempted child abduction, lived 3 blocks from Emma's house and was in the area when she disappeared. Porter's voice rose slightly, gaining strength. Emma Rodriguez gave you the truth today. The evidence supports her truth, and your verdict must reflect that truth. Find David Thornton guilty. Give Emma and her family justice. Give this community safety, and send a message that those who prey on innocent children will be held accountable. He returned to his seat, and the courtroom remained silent for several heartbeats. Marcus Webb rose for the defense's closing argument, and he looked like a man who knew he was fighting a losing battle. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by grim determination. "Ladies and gentlemen," Webb began, his voice lacking its earlier confidence, "nobody in this courtroom, not me, not my client, not anyone, wants to diminish what Emma Rodriguez experienced. That child suffered terribly. She was taken from her home and held captive. That is a fact, and it's a tragedy." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But your job isn't to convict someone because a crime was committed. Your job is to convict the right person beyond a reasonable doubt, and I submit to you that reasonable doubt still exists in this case." Webb moved toward the jury, but his movements were less theatrical now, more subdued. "Emma is 3 years old. She experienced severe trauma. Is it possible, just possible, that in her traumatized state she's confused? That she's identifying a man she's seen in her neighborhood, a familiar face, rather than actually remembering her abductor? Children are suggestible. They want to please adults. They want to give the answers people are looking for." Several jurors frowned at this argument, their expressions skeptical. "The physical evidence is circumstantial," Webb continued, but even he sounded less convinced than before. "Fiber evidence can't be definitively matched. Cell phone towers cover large areas. Security footage shows a car, not a driver. Yes, my client is a registered offender, but he's completed his sentence. He's followed every parole requirement, and he's trying to rebuild his life. Are we going to convict him simply because of his past?" Webb returned to his table, placing his hand on Thornton's shoulder, a gesture that looked more obligatory than confident. "You must be certain beyond a reasonable doubt. If you have any doubt, any at all, you must acquit. That's not just the law, that's justice." He sat down, and the courtroom buzzed with quiet conversation until Judge Henderson's gavel restored silence. The jury instructions took 45 minutes. Judge Henderson explained the charges, the burden of proof, the definition of reasonable doubt. He reminded them that Rex's presence was solely for the child's comfort and should not influence their decision. But everyone in that courtroom knew that Emma's testimony had already made the decision inevitable. The jury retired to deliberate at 2:47 p.m. In the hallway outside, Maria and Carlos sat with Emma between them. The little girl was coloring in her book, humming softly, a sound her parents hadn't heard in 6 months. Dr. Chen had warned them that Emma's breakthrough in court didn't mean instant healing, that there would still be difficult days ahead. But today, in this moment, Emma seemed lighter, as if testifying had lifted some of the weight she'd been carrying. Porter paced the corridor, checking his watch every few minutes. "Quick deliberation could be good or bad," he muttered to Brennan. "It's good," Brennan replied confidently. "They saw what we all saw. That little girl's testimony was unshakable." In the courtroom's attorney conference room, Webb sat across from Thornton, who'd maintained his calm facade until now. But cracks were showing. "How long do you think?" Thornton asked, his voice tight. "Could be hours, could be days," Webb replied, though he didn't believe it would be long. "That kid, she was so convincing. The way she looked at me." Thornton's mask slipped further, revealing something ugly beneath. Webb held up his hand. Don't say anything else. Whatever happens, maintain your innocence. Understand? At 5:33 p.m., 2 hours and 46 minutes after beginning deliberations, the jury sent word to Judge Henderson. They'd reached a verdict. The courtroom filled rapidly. News of the quick verdict had spread through the courthouse, and everyone wanted to be present for the conclusion. Maria carried Emma, who'd been playing with Officer Mitchell and Rex in a private room. The little girl seemed confused by all the sudden activity, but when she saw Rex enter the courtroom with Mitchell, she smiled. "Good dog is here," she told her mother happily. Judge Henderson entered and everyone rose. The jury filed in, their faces serious, resolved. Porter studied them, trying to read their expressions. Jury foreman, juror number 4, a middle-aged accountant named Robert Chen, held a folded piece of paper. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Henderson asked. "We have, Your Honor." "How do you find?" Robert Chen unfolded the paper, though Porter suspected he didn't need to read it. The verdict was already burned into his mind. His voice was clear and unwavering. "In the case of the People versus David Thornton, on the charge of kidnapping in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." Maria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Carlos closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "On the charge of child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty." Thornton's head dropped, his shoulders sagging. "On the charge of unlawful restraint of a minor, we find the defendant guilty." Porter felt Brennan's hand grip his arm, but he couldn't move, couldn't speak. They'd done it. Justice had been served. Webb had his hand on Thornton's shoulder, speaking quietly to his client, whose face had gone completely white. Judge Henderson polled the jury. All 12 confirmed the verdict. Then he set a sentencing date for 3 weeks later and ordered Thornton remanded to custody pending sentencing. As bailiffs moved to take Thornton away, his eyes found Emma one last time. The little girl was clapping her hands. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could sense the relief and joy in her parents, and when her eyes met Thornton's, she said clearly, "The bad man is going away." Thornton looked away first, unable to face the child whose voice had convicted him. Outside the courthouse, news cameras captured Maria kneeling beside Emma, who was petting Rex one more time before going home. "Thank you," Maria said to Mitchell, her voice breaking. "Thank you for saving my daughter twice." Mitchell knelt down too, his hand on Rex's head. "He's the hero, ma'am. I just held the leash." Emma wrapped her arms around Rex's neck. "You're the best good dog ever," she whispered. And in that moment, with justice finally served and a family beginning to heal, Rex's tail wagged with the simple, pure joy of a dog who'd done his job and saved a life. 3 weeks after the verdict, David Thornton stood before Judge Henderson for sentencing. The courtroom was once again filled to capacity, but the atmosphere was different now, less tense, more expectant. Justice was no longer a question mark hanging in the air. It was a certainty waiting to be pronounced. The prosecution had requested the maximum sentence, 35 years without the possibility of parole. Webb had filed for leniency, arguing that Thornton had no prior violent offenses and that he'd already served time for his earlier conviction. But his arguments fell flat in the face of what everyone had witnessed during the trial. Judge Henderson's voice was grave as he addressed Thornton, who stood in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed, his earlier calm demeanor completely shattered. "Mr. Thornton, I have presided over this court for 30 years. I have sentenced murderers, rapists, and violent criminals of every kind, but rarely have I encountered a crime as calculated and cruel as what you did to Emma Rodriguez." Henderson paused, his eyes hard. "You targeted a 3-year-old child. You stole her from her own backyard, from her own family. You held her captive in deplorable conditions, chained her like an animal, and subjected her to terror that no child, no person, should ever experience." Thornton's mother sobbed quietly in the gallery, but no one else made a sound. The impact statement provided by the Rodriguez family details the devastation you caused: 6 months of silence, nightmares, trauma that Emma will carry for the rest of her life. You didn't just hurt that child for 8 hours. You wounded her soul. Henderson's voice grew stronger. But Emma Rodriguez is also a survivor. She found the courage to speak. She faced you in this courtroom and told her truth, and that truth has condemned you. The judge looked down at his papers, then back at Thornton. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 35 years in the state penitentiary without the possibility of parole. You will be registered as a violent offender for life. And if there is any justice in this world, you will spend every day of those 35 years remembering the face of the child whose life you tried to destroy. The gavel came down with finality. Thornton was led away, his head bowed, his life effectively over. As the bailiffs escorted him through the side door, he glanced back one final time, not at his mother, not at his attorney, but toward the spot where Emma had testified. The empty chair seemed to accuse him even in its vacancy. Outside the courthouse steps, Porter held a press conference with the Rodriguez family beside him. Emma sat in Carlos's arms, playing with a small toy Rex that Mitchell had given her, a plush German shepherd that she now carried everywhere. Today, justice was served, Porter announced to the assembled reporters. Emma Rodriguez's courage in speaking her truth not only brought her abductor to justice, but has also opened important conversations about how we support child witnesses in our legal system. Maria stepped forward, her voice steady despite her emotions. 6 months ago, our daughter was stolen from us. When we got her back, she was silent, trapped in a prison of fear. Today, Emma laughs. She sings. She's starting to be herself again. We want to thank everyone who never gave up on her or on this case. A reporter called out, "Emma, do you have anything you want to say?" Emma looked up from her toy, considered the question with the seriousness only a 3-year-old can muster, then said clearly, "The bad man went away, and Rex is my friend." The crowd erupted in supportive applause. The months that followed brought profound changes to Meadowbrook and beyond. Emma's case sparked a wave of legislative action. 7 states introduced bills allowing certified facility dogs to accompany child witnesses during testimony. The Emma's Law, as it became known in Pennsylvania, passed unanimously, requiring courts to provide reasonable accommodations for traumatized child witnesses. Officer Mitchell received a commendation for Rex's heroic work, but more importantly, he established a new program pairing K-9 units with child trauma services. Rex became the first official courthouse facility dog in Meadowbrook County, spending his off-duty hours making visits to children who'd experienced trauma. And every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Rex's most important visit was to the Rodriguez household. Emma's therapy continued with Dr. Chen, but Rex's presence accelerated her healing in ways traditional therapy couldn't. When Emma had nightmares, and she still did, though less frequently, Maria would show her pictures of Rex. "The good dog is keeping watch," she'd say. "You're safe." Gradually, Emma's world expanded. She started going to the park again. She made friends with neighborhood children. She went to birthday parties. The empty, haunted look in her eyes was replaced by genuine smiles and childlike wonder. Carlos installed a new swing set in the backyard. Emma had been afraid of the old one, and slowly, with patience and love, she began playing outside again. The first time she pumped her legs and called out, "Look, Mommy, I'm flying," Maria had to sit down on the porch steps and cry with relief. 2 years after the trial, on a bright September morning, Emma Rodriguez started kindergarten. Maria had been anxious about this milestone. Would Emma be okay around so many new people? Would the other children sense her past trauma? Would she be able to make friends? But Emma, now 5 years old with bright eyes and an infectious giggle, practically skipped into her classroom. She wore a backpack covered in dog stickers, and she carried something special for show and tell. That afternoon, when Maria picked her up, Emma was bursting with excitement. Mommy, I told everyone about Rex. My teacher said he's a hero and all my friends want to meet him. Maybe we can arrange that, Maria said, smiling. What else did you do today? Emma chattered non-stop about her new friends, about the books they read, about the playground. She was normal, happy, thriving, everything a kindergartner should be. That evening, Mitchell brought Rex for his regular visit. Emma met them at the door, and as always, her first words were, "Hi, good dog." They sat in the backyard, Emma telling Rex about her first day of school while the German shepherd listened with patient attention, his tail wagging slowly. Mitchell and the Rodriguez parents watched from the porch, drinking coffee and talking quietly. "She's doing so well," Mitchell observed. "You'd never know." "We'd know," Carlos said softly. "We'll always know, but she's healing, she's becoming herself again, and we have you and Rex to thank for that." "Rex did all the work," Mitchell said, as he always did, both times. As the sun set over Meadowbrook, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emma lay in the grass with her head on Rex's side, staring up at the clouds. "Rex," she said seriously, "when I grow up, I want to be a police officer with a dog just like you, so I can save kids who are scared just like you saved me." Rex's tail thumped against the ground, and Emma giggled. "I think he likes that idea," Mitchell called from the porch. Emma sat up and hugged Rex around his neck, the way she'd done in the courtroom that day, the way she'd done hundreds of times since. "You're my best friend, Rex. You're the bravest, goodest dog in the whole world." And in that moment, in that backyard where terror had once stolen a child, there was only peace, healing, and the unbreakable bond between a little girl and the hero who'd saved her life. Emma Rodriguez had found her voice again, and she would never be silent again. The end.